The Jewish ruling council, the Sanhedrin, made up of factions who often disagreed with each other. The Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the teachers of the law were now in all complete agreement. Jesus must die. They must make it happen at all costs. That was their final decision on the matter. And they would nag and batter and question and make anybody who had the right to put Jesus to death feel uncomfortable, and to the point where they did it. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, and Herod were both opposed to crucifying Jesus. They said they could find nothing wrong with him. So Pontius Pilate has one final way out, he thinks. It was the Jewish tradition, or the Roman tradition for the Jewish people, that for the special Passover festival, there was an appeasement of the people that they would release one political prisoner. Now he has somebody up his sleeve, a violent man called Barabbas. And so he gives the crowd the choice. And the people who had shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," seeing Jesus as their saviour a few days earlier when he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey, now they shout, "Crucify him." But they do also shout something else. They shout, "Release Barabbas." Now, all four gospel stories give us different details. John doesn't mention Barabbas, but he mentions a really important detail that is not known to the others: a conversation between Pontius Pilate and the chief priests, those who were in charge of the religious life of the Jewish people. When Pilate says to them, "Here is your king," to the Jews, they shout, take him away, crucify him." Pilate says, "Shall I crucify your king?" And they reply, "We have no king but Caesar." They're even willing to say that they will fall under the reign of the madman in Rome who has pronounced himself a god in all the worst ways that you could possibly imagine. That is the price that they're willing to pay to make sure that Jesus dies. So who was this Jesus Barabbas man? Yes, they had the same first name. Well, Matthew just tells us that he was a well-known prisoner, somebody who has had a high profile. He doesn't tell us anything more. But Mark and Luke give us details about him being a murderer, but in the context of an uprising, an insurrection. And for that reason, it's almost certain that Barabbas was a zealot. So the four ways that the Jewish people have found of forming themselves into factions to oppose the Romans who they did not want conquering their country were kind of split into these four ways of looking at things. The Essenes were the let's run away people. They said, we cannot live a Jewish life under Roman rule, so we will move out into communities in the desert where nobody will bother us and we can get on with our life together. Out of interest, that's how the Dead Sea Scrolls survived. It was an Essene community close to the Dead Sea in the middle of the wilderness outside of Jerusalem. The Sadducees, the political leaders of the Sanhedrin, said, we will compromise on everything except the temple. As long as the Romans let us worship our God in our temple, then we will let them have absolutely everything else. The problem with the Sadducees is that their compromise was a bit like knocking over the first of a set of dominoes, that they then compromised on faith and belief, and they came to the point where they no longer even believed that there was life after death. And there comes a point where you wonder what the point of their worship of the Lord of heaven and earth was. The Pharisees should have been the hero of the piece. They said, we will not run away, we will not compromise, we will live a fully Jewish life in the face of the Romans. And yet there was something about the way they controlled things, the way that they applied the law of Moses without thought to its original meaning and so on, that meant that they were the people who conflicted with Jesus the most, when they were the people who should have recognized who he was the most. And finally, the Zealots said that there's only one answer to this, and it's violent revolution. So if you've heard the phrase, one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, then to the Jewish people, Barabbas may have been a freedom fighter. To the Romans, he was definitely a terrorist, somebody who used violent insurrection to oppose the Romans. If you're trying to compare him with Simon Maccabees that we spoke about riding into Jerusalem on his war horse in 164 BC, then that is a very unfair comparison for Simon Maccabees, because what he did was he fought a war head on with the Roman opposition. What Barabbas did and what the other zealots did was murdering people for political gain. They might have had a very worthy cause, but their methodology was something that Jesus could never have agreed with, which is strange and amazing, because one of Jesus' 12 disciples, not Simon Peter, but another Simon, was a zealot, and we can assume that he changed his life around. The infamy of Barabbas probably also meant that he was somebody who scared others. Maybe he was one of those violent men that wanted to do violence and found a good cause to attach it to. That is quite likely. But there must have been a reason that the crowd was so willing to release him, and that probably was the fact that they had a sneaking admiration for somebody who was fighting the Romans in the way that they could not. But the most striking contrast is between Jesus of Nazareth and Jesus Barabbas. Barabbas thought that the only way was violence, and Jesus was absolutely determined in every way to walk the path of peace. So the crowd didn't only shout, "Crucify Jesus." They also shouted, "Release the man of violence, who will carry on his violent streak inevitably once he is released." We know that full well, but that's who we say should go free. The King of the Jews, as Pontius Pilate described him, crucify him on our behalf. We don't know what happened to Barabbas. There are many stories in the early church. Some say that he saw Jesus' death and then resurrection and turned his life around and became a Christian. Others say he died in a later insurrection where he took his terrorism or his freedom fighting one move too far. We don't know. But this is actually the story of the crowd, not the story of Barabbas, shouting what they wanted and fulfilling what Jesus said, both when he wept on the Mount of Olives before entering to Jerusalem and also what he said on the cross. Forgive them, Father, because they don't know what they are doing.